Thank you, RL. You get extra points today for showing up in person. I just want you to know that. Isn't it interesting? We live in this country, yet the first snow is like, what do I do on the road? At least I was. Maybe that was just me. So first, just to confirm local recent history, on Wednesday, December 8th, at 1:25 and 8 seconds, we ceased to have a mortgage. And I can't tell you how exciting I was to hand make hand the check in person. And as I said the last time I spoke, it's not about so much the money or mortgages per se. It closes off a portion of our journey. And I think it's important to acknowledge when you come to finishing points. And of course, the journeys are never done. It just means, we start step one of a different journey. And I really believe that we are starting a new chapter in many ways. But if you want a little bit of backstory of how we got into the mortgage in the first place, look at last week's Sunday service. I wasn't here, but Marcia was also here. And Marcia gave such a great little encapsulation of the drama and trauma even of what it took to come into this building. And it actually would take, I think, 2 venti coffees at Starbucks to really go over it completely. And I think if Marcia and RL and I got together, we could probably piece the story together pretty well if you ever were interested. But Marcia, that was such a great little encapsulation. But what was important about that encapsulation wasn't even so much and this happened and this happened. It was that the underlying purpose of why we were doing what we were doing. That there is a vision behind it, and in that, even again set up so well by Marcia today, a sense of resolve that one has to come to allow things to happen through us when it seems like there's no way that it could. And part of our journeys of becoming call on us to remember those moments of resolve, why we are really doing something, because sometimes the road gets really rough. And even these last 2 years, we have all been on a very interesting journey together, to say the least. We've done it together, we've done individual journeys, and it's been difficult even, I think, in moments to come up with an idea, or what is this all about? Or what should I even have resolve about to get me through this journey? Because it's like, I didn't bring this one on, at least consciously. It's something that we have been sharing. So this idea of what is this all about? Again, what do I have to have resolve about? What is a higher vision of my life, knowing that there's aspects of our lives that have been falling apart, never to be seen again? So it's an interesting point in history. And as we come now to Christmas, there are great parts of the Christmas story that we can also look at, that I think are inspirations for me for our journeys. Because when you look at the Christmas story, as I wrote a bit about in my blog this week, it's a story about journeys, of multiple journeys. I mean, really think about that. Of course, many of us were raised with a Christmas story, and depending on if you're raised in a particular religious home or not, it was either a secular story or a very religious story, and there's different versions of it. And that's really okay, because there are so many layers of this that we can look at and realize that it's not just some other people's stories 2,000 years ago. It actually is relevant and current today, whether you believe in any of the mystical aspects of it or not. It's an amazing story. And again, a story about journeys. So think of, if you drive by a couple of our Christian churches locally, they will have a nativity scene in front of it. In fact, a couple are going to have live nativity scenes. Father Ron was telling me he's even got a line on a couple camels. It's funny, I always say, things in the school of ministry they didn't tell you it was your job. Finding camels. I've not had to do that one yet. I've had a lot of surprises, but I've not been called to get camels yet. God bless you, Father Ron, for taking on the camel portion of the story. But anyways, when you look at that, and again, it's a very stylized tableau. I don't think it's a historical thing where all these things came exactly with this little, thing. But when you think of it and you look at the story, everyone that's there had a journey to get there, to be together in a moment of time. That some was very involved and they planned it and they followed that star to get there, and others just happened to be in the neighborhood. It's like, oh, I hear there's a miracle going on. Let's go over there. Then, of course, the moment ended and they continued on their journeys elsewhere. So that's one way that we can look at what really is our journey. And also the story of a journey about the Christmas story that I love, that I've been thinking a lot this last couple years, one that I've never heard talked about, is the journey of the census. So we've all been told, those of us who were raised with the Christmas story, that Mary and Joseph went to Bethlehem for a census, as well as their fellow citizens. What's interesting with that, and I just read another paper online, that no historian can find record of there being a census. And you think, well, why did they throw it in there? Again, a lot of aspects, I believe, are to be metaphorical. So what do you do in a census? You stand to be counted. You claim who you are and where you have been and possibly where you intend to be going. So isn't it interesting that everyone that's being called to this nativity scene are being called to a part of the world where they're being asked to stand and be counted? What is true for you, in a sense? Is it the deeper things? And when you think of it, the beginning of any journey, or only a conscious beginning of a journey, we, in a sense, do that. Why am I starting this journey? Or why am I even continuing this journey? What is true for me? And of course, as we all know on our journeys, what we think is true at the beginning of the journey might not be the same as what appears to be true at the end of the journey. That's part of it. And there's another part, and here's the favorite part of the Christmas story, which I bring up every couple years. I love looking at material that is not in the official stories in the Bible. Not to say there's anything wrong with official stories in the Bible, but if you go back in history several hundred years, there were all these gospels floating around. And different bishops at that time, I think it was like in the 4th or 5th century, decided, well, what are we going to include in the Bible? It was like, imagine like a table. There are like 50 things here. What are we going to put in here? And just to remind you what Father Brian Baker has said that I always remember, he says, the Bible is not a book, it's a library. So it's how are we going to compile all this stuff and stories that are even conflicting? What do we want to be, I guess you could say, the party line of the stories here? And they put it together, but there was all this materials that didn't make the cut that actually got lost. And many of them were found in what we call the Dead Sea Scrolls in the early part of the 20th century. And one of my favorite stories that was uncovered around the Christmas story was a really interesting one. And in fact, some of these stories were a little grittier, more human, kind of almost shocking a little bit. I think the ones in the Bible are kind of pretty. But these others, and not to say that one is truer than the other, but there's just something about it that adds another layer of it. So in this version of the story, of course, Mary shows up pregnant. And we are told that it is a miraculous happening. And also in this particular gospel, Joseph is not seen as her husband, but as her guardian, that she is his ward. And that he's supposed to protect her, and look what happened. So in this part of the story, what you do is you take your issue to the priest at the temple and say, guess what happened? The Holy Spirit visited our house, and look at Mary. And you're like, yeah, imagine any of you have kids, when your kids came home, the Holy Spirit visited my girlfriend, no, I don't think so. And so there was an answer to this. And I don't know if this is a true answer or one that was created for this narrative. And so the priest says that we have a test for this. First, you take a solemn drink of truth to say that I stand in the truth of my word, and then we send you out to walk individually into the desert for a prescribed amount of time. And if you are telling the truth, you will be guided by God and shown where to get water and food and shelter and all that. And you will, once the time is done, you will come back and we will know that you have told the truth because God had guided your trip into the desert. And of course, if you're not telling the truth, you're not going to make it back. You won't find water. You won't find food. You won't find shelter. You'll be under a sand dune for eternity, or at least what's left of you. And in the story, they're both sent out, and they both return, and it's declared true that she truly was visited by the Holy Spirit, and we could recognize this as a miracle. I think this is such an amazing corollary to our metaphorical journeys. Again, we start off with what is true. What are our hopes and dreams and intentions? When this spiritual community was started, those questions had to have been answered. There were a couple times in our history where it seemed like it might be a good time to call it a day. And again, those questions were answered or asked. What is true? What is motivating us? What's propelling us forward? What do we seek to have here as a spiritual community? And so you start with that resolve. I love the fact that so many stories in the Bible are about journeys through the desert. I think that is a great metaphor, a journey through the desert. These last 2 years, in many ways, have been journeys through the desert. In a way, there's nothing more almost frightening, in a sense. The desert represents a place where there are few resources. I could think of better places to be lost, in a sense, that my odds might be better of finding water or a little bit of sustenance before getting rescued or finding my way. And there are stories, of course, of people intentionally going out into the desert, and think of it possibly of a vision quest or anything you would like to think of going deeper. And it's almost this thing of getting rid of all these things that physically support us as a way of finding out what really supports us. So it's a great metaphor. But crazy things happen in the desert, don't they? I don't know, I haven't been lost in it. I've driven through the desert. But here's the thing that happened that's most to be aware of on our journeys, and it's symbolized in the desert. In the desert, you see mirages. So the most common physical mirage, and I'm sure you've all seen it as we drove through the desert, not walking through the desert, we see what appears to be a body of water on the horizon, don't we? And it's a play of heat, that the ground gets really hot and it starts to rise, and in the far distance, it almost looks like there is a body of water. And so imagine if you were actually walking the desert having been lost, and let's say you didn't know the nature of mirages, and if you were really thirsty, you might say, there's water over there. I thought I should go this way, but maybe now I'll go that way because this will help me survive and then I can get back on track. But if you were in that situation, you would find that you would never get there. That it would always be on the horizon. It would just be out of your reach in some form and at some point you might realize that's not real. And then, of course, if you truly were walking and lost in the desert, you would start to see other things in that mirage. And you would not only see things with your eyes, you would start to see things within that were mirages as well. I mean, think of it, haven't we all been in times where our mind just goes crazy and creating all sorts of things? We're just so sure that this person is thinking whatever, and this is what happened, and we make up scenarios, and gosh, we have arguments in our head of all sorts of things, and they're mirages. So the lesson of our journeys of becoming is to come to terms with our mirages. Boy, there's been a lot of mirages the last couple years, and I'm not going to give you my opinion, what I think is the mirages and what is real. But here's the thing. We have all taken in very similar information and have come up with different conclusions. You notice that. Sometimes the arguments you'll find on, well, my sister's an airline attendant, on airplanes and in markets are from people who have taken in the same information and have come to a different conclusion and are ready to take a stand for that conclusion even though they're completely different. So that means that, again, I'm not going to name names, some people are operating under mirages. And part of this, again, we're not sure who that is. Of course, we're certain that we personally aren't operating under mirages. I have found the right thing here. I found, some guy named Bob is doing a blog in his basement. Bob's got to be right? I'm going to base all my knowledge on that blog that's happening there. It's funny. And we just, are blocking heads because what I know to be true is true. And what you think is true is craziness. So there's something in this big lesson that we're working out on the world stage right now to come to terms with what's a mirage? And maybe we don't know as much as we think we know. So I had a conversation with RL a few weeks ago, and I think it's something you said in Sunday service. Wasn't it something along the lines that 2 years ago you were much more certain with what you knew than you are today? Yes. Mm-hmm. So let that sink in again. Actually, a successful part of our journey is when we start to realize how clueless we actually are. I think that is a significant step in our growth of consciousness to realize what I had put my line in the sand about might just not be as true as I thought it was. That I think part of the journey is not so much often to come up with what we think are the right answers, but it's about coming to a point of willingness to see something differently, or a larger picture, or to realize that you can actually include multiple things at the same time that appear not to be compatible, but they are in some weird way. Because, back to the desert analogy, we draw, I love this analogy, I'm drawing my line in the sand. One poof of wind and that line is gone. I mean, think about it. I'm putting my life, reputation on this thing here that I'm drawing and gone. That's part of the illusion of the whole thing. We just think, oh, that is so true. And then, oh, it's gone. Where'd it go? Kind of thing. So I think part of our journey in this metaphoric desert is to realize what we think is true just might not be. Maybe I need to be a little bit more magnanimous and open even to my next door neighbor who I think is really off. Maybe just a little bit. I think that's part of our journey. Second thing to really look at in this, and not just metaphorical journeys, but again, we're on major journey time right now. To be aware of how your journey is supported or not. Now, this doesn't mean, in saying supported, that things are turning out exactly how you would like them to turn out. Things are turning out exactly how I had set an intention for it to turn out. It means that you are being supported on a path that may be going in a completely different direction, and in that possible new direction, things are showing up in time and on time as you need them. So I have really found that on my own journey, that when things seem to really not be supported, I'm probably following a mirage. And it's funny how we are as human beings. If I just try it again, This'll do it. I know, let me go chase that water thing on the horizon again. This time it'll be there, kind of thing. And that journey is usually not supported because it's really not the right one for you. Might even be right for someone else, but not right for you. And I found that when I shift my own consciousness or open up or humble myself to understand that what I thought was so true might not be so true, that I start to see my journey supported again. And again, not everything showing up that you want humanly in our human ego, that you start to see a path that is authentically yours. So start to notice what's being supported, and if it doesn't seem to be, is there another course adjustment that you need to make? It's so interesting in faith communities today, as I talk to my colleagues, not only in Centers of Spiritual Living, but in other denominations, how a lot of our faith communities are having their dark nights of the soul these days. That I know different communities that, especially during our time of severe lockdown, that their finances were as such that they had to let go of their buildings. That they couldn't pay the mortgage anymore. That they went to virtual only online, which is great, but they're even thinking, well, what does that mean for us? Again, the questions aren't answered yet on this journey, like, what direction should we be going? What direction will be supported? And of course, when things happen like that, it's not in the sense that we did anything wrong in consciousness. It just means that it's time to go in a different direction. I think sometimes we take it too personally. If what I really want isn't being supported, I must be doing something wrong. No, it means that you're just not looking in the right place. And so as I talk to my colleagues, some are like, we really don't know what we're supposed to do yet. We're really trying to be, as they say in the question, say, what is our direction as a community right now? And even for those that have maintained their buildings and paid off their mortgages, we're on new directions. We don't get exempt from asking that question, because it's not, again, about the mortgage or the building or anything about that. It's about what is the thing that's driving you as a community. So how is your journey right now being supported? And not just financially, but just in consciousness, as just things are showing up. And to really be willing to admit and be humbled by the fact that there's so much you don't know, and that's okay. Many times over the years I've said, pointing to the first few years I was here, and of course, actually it's every year I was here, but I say, I didn't even know what it was that I didn't know. And I think that's what's true today. We don't know what it is we don't know. We don't know the missing pieces. We don't know what that little thing is that's going to kind of open that next little part of our path and journey that's meant for us to experience. So it's a sense of we need to get away from this thing as once I come to this point in this journey, I'm going to 100% know. I mean, actually, it's the miraculous as well as the exasperating part of being human and being on a journey. There's no final arrival point. I think we just need to look at it a little bit differently. I just want to close with just a couple lines here from Michael Beckwith, who said, and he's talking about our journey as something that is unfolding. It says, when we're dealing with the word unfolding, we're coming to an understanding that we're not in this world to get anything. We're in this world to let something unfold from within us. So yes, we live in a physical world. We all have physical needs. We all need a house to live in, or something to live in. We need to have food in our refrigerators, gas in our car, and a car. That's just part of it. But our journey is not about getting those things. That is the equipment that just gets to be supplied along the way. As he says, to think there is something that is seeking to come through us and as us that's bigger than ourselves. And if we just hold that in our thoughts, all that other stuff, which is great and fun, and I love to have, will have a way of just kind of coming with it to a certain extent. So to keep, especially this time of years we're in the Christmas story, and with this larger-than-life story, what is seeking to be born and unfolding through me now? In this world situation that we've had that has just driven us all mad, what wants to come through me now? What is my job? And that's the Christmas gift we have to offer. So let's take this within right now. As we first and foremost give thanks and express our gratitude for this day, for this wonderful snow, for my incredible young dog who got to romp in snow for the first time this morning. How amazing was that? And as we are just in wonder this time of year, we allow ourselves to be vessels of spirit. We allow amazing things to unfold through us and as us. We simply declare ourselves as willing and ready and available. And so we also allow ourselves to be part of this, the miraculous part of this season. We open ourselves and say yes. And so it is.